So, based on this understanding of individuals' supply of labor power, we can conceptualize a supply curve that shows the relationship between the price and the quantity. In this case, price is the wage rate, the wages that you will be getting for by supplying your labor in the labor market, and the quantity is the number of hours of paid labor supplied. Right? In other words, we are looking only at the effect of different wage levels on the individual's willingness to go out and work in the market. And remember, the individual's willingness to go out to work, or the number of hours that a person is willing to give to paid work, is decided based on the decided working based on, how much you value the wages that you are going to get from that paid work, instead of, resting, entertainment, watching Netflix, leisure, and other activities. So, this labor supply curve is just upward sloping, and it is the same as any other supply curve that we have seen before. So, one thing to note is that as the wage increases, paid labor becomes more attractive relative to other alternatives. So, when we are offered a very low wage, an individual may be reluctant to join the labor force, so, or to supply many hours of work, because they would think that they would get more benefit out of watching Netflix and out of, maybe self employment and doing other activities, resting, entertainment, right? But as the wage goes up, the higher the market wage rate, the more attractive it is to engage in additional paid labor instead of other activities, because that will be beneficial for you. On the other side, we also have the demand for labor, and who raises that demand for labor? Mostly businesses, but sometimes not for profit organizations, as well as government, as well as occasionally households. So, on the demand side of the labor market, consider a firm seeking to hire a specific type of labor. What should guide the firm's decision about how much labor to hire is the question. So, from the viewpoint of a profit maximizing firm, there is a trade off that they face when hiring labor. The trade off is the cost that are raised by the amount of additional wages that are being paid to the new hire, and the benefit, which is the revenue, which is increased by the value of the increase in output produced by the additional hour of work, or the additional labor that is being hired. So, clearly, as long as the firm gets more additional revenue than it has to pay out in additional wages, it should keep hiring workers. But if it is getting less in additional revenue than it is paying out in additional wages, it should reduce the number of workers that it hires. And this is exactly what is captured in the labor demand curve for the market. And as we see, the demand for labor is a downward sloping curve. And this is exactly the same curve that we have seen in chapter 3, as and this is because employers have an incentive to economize on labor when wages are high, while they will tend to substitute cheap labor for other factors when wages are low. So, when wages are low, the employers are going to hire more and more workers, replacing them for technology, for example. But when the wages are high, employers tend to economize on labor and hire less and less of workers. So that is why this demand curve is downward sloping, and the logic of this is same as we have seen in chapter 3. But remember that labor supply and demand is not very easy to turn around in short run. In a short run, a firm is forced to live with its fixed inputs, and labor is one of the inputs and its current technology. So the technical choice faced by the firms are very limited in the short run, so the labor supply doesn't move as freely as the supply for goods, for example cars or mobile phones. The technological choice faced by firms are greater in the long run. In the short run, a firm is just forced to live with what they have, right? But in the long term, they can mechanize and substitute machinery for labor. So the demand for labor is quite fixed in the short run. But there are, apart from wages, there are a number of factors that may cause the demand curve to shift, and that includes demand for finished goods, technology, number of employees, and availability of other inputs. And I'm not going into the detail of it because it's just the same that we saw in chapter 3. So the equilibrium or the market adjustment for labor markets is just the intersection of supply and demand, and it is the same as the market for goods that we learnt about in chapter 3. The equilibrium will adjust in response to the shift in demand and supply, and book talks about the demand for real estate agents, which went from boom to bust when the housing bubble burst in 2006 and 2007. As can be seen in the graph, this reduction in workers demand reduced the wages in the sector, but there are important things to note in the case of a labor market. So unlike the case with product markets, changes in wages and employment take some time. As workers change their career plans, and employer adjust wages, which is not very easy because they are generally set by some kind of labor contract, and there are stipulations about minimum wages, and we'll talk about them later. So the labor market is, in the short run, is not as flexible as the product market, as I have said before.